In the ballroom of the Beverly Hilton Hotel, on a Tuesday evening in March of 1983, 430 people sat in folding chairs arranged in precise rows across 18,000 square feet of carpeted floor. The chairs were the kind with thin cushions and silver legs, and most of the people sitting in them had spent decades inside rooms exactly like this one: dojos, training halls, film sets, military gymnasiums. They were not civilians, they were practitioners. The room held, by one instructor's later estimate, somewhere in the range of 6,000 combined years of martial arts experience. That is the kind of audience that does not impress easily. That is the kind of audience that watches with their whole body. The occasion was a closed demonstration hosted by the Professional Karate Association, an event not advertised to the public and not covered by any major press outlet at the time. The purpose was simple: a series of technique presentations by working practitioners, followed by a panel discussion on the future of martial arts in American cinema. The evening had been running for 40 minutes. 3 instructors had already presented. The room was attentive but unhurried. The overhead lights were set low, and the portable stage at the far end of the ballroom was lit by 2 rented spotlights that cast a pale even glow across the demonstration floor. Chuck Norris was in the 4th row. He was wearing dark trousers and a plain white button-down shirt, collar open. Sleeves rolled once at the cuff. There was nothing on the shirt to indicate who he was. He had arrived without an entourage. He was sitting with a cup of coffee he had not touched, watching the stage with the particular stillness of a man who has spent 50 years learning how to be calm in rooms where other people are not. He was 43 years old. Steven Seagal was 31. He had arrived in Los Angeles 3 years earlier from Japan, where he had trained in Aikido under masters whose names were spoken with genuine reverence in certain circles. He held a 6th-degree black belt. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, and weighed 220 pounds. He had the kind of physical presence that fills a doorway before the person walks through it. And he moved with the deliberate ease of someone who has been told, often enough to believe it, that there is no one in the room who presents a serious problem. He was not yet famous in the way the films would make him famous. But he was already known. In the Aikido community, and in the corners of Hollywood where martial arts consultants found work, his name carried weight. He had trained bodyguards, he had trained law enforcement, he had trained by his own accounting individuals whose names were classified. He walked into the Beverly Hilton that evening as someone who had already decided what the room contained and where he stood in relation to it. He was scheduled to present forth, after a judo demonstration and before the panel. His segment was allocated 12 minutes. He would not need 12 minutes. In the next 40 seconds, from the moment he crossed the stage to the moment he stepped off it, something would happen that 47 people in that room would still be describing in specific detail 20 years later. The words they used would change across 2 decades, distances would shift. Participants would multiply, the sequence would compress and expand, but the core of it would remain consistent. Because what happened in those 40 seconds was the kind of thing that does not blur with time, it sharpens. Nobody in that ballroom knew what they were about to see. The judo presentation concluded. There was polite, measured applause. The applause of people who know what they are watching and are measuring it against an internal standard. The demonstrator bowed and stepped off the stage. A woman from the organizing committee moved to the microphone and introduced the next presenter. She gave his name. She listed his credentials. She said the word Aikido 3 times. And the room received it with the kind of attention that real credentials reliably produce. Steven Seagal walked to the center of the stage. He did not begin immediately. He stood at the center of the lit area for a count of 4, surveying the room with a slow, even scan, not nervous, not theatrical, simply gathering the space the way a man takes ownership of a room before he speaks. Two of his senior students followed him to the stage and stood at the edges. He introduced himself in a voice that was low and deliberate. He spoke about his training in Japan. He spoke about Aikido's philosophy of redirection. He spoke about the difference between force meeting force and force meeting space. These were not new ideas to the people in the room. They listened anyway. Then he moved. What followed was 11 minutes of legitimate, serious, expert technique. His students attacked from multiple angles and were redirected, controlled, and placed on the mat with efficiency that was neither showy nor slow. The wrist locks were clean. The throws had the kind of weight transfer at the apex that only comes from thousands of repetitions. His footwork had been refined to the point where it no longer looked like footwork at all. It looked like the natural arrangement of a man standing somewhere useful. 3 people in the audience were later asked, independently, to evaluate the demonstration. 2 of them used the same word, precise. The third said functional. These are the highest compliments available in those rooms. He was good. That is important. It must be stated clearly. What came next did not come from inadequacy. It came from something else entirely. At the 11-minute mark, Seagal moved to the front of the stage. His students stepped back. He looked out at the audience for a long moment, and something in the room shifted slightly, not in a way that was loud or visible, but in a way that the people sitting in those chairs felt in their shoulders and the backs of their necks. The professional martial artist's nervous system recognizes threat change before the conscious mind has processed it. Something in the air in the Beverly Hilton ballroom changed. He said that he wanted to speak plainly. He said that there was a gap in American martial arts cinema. He said that the techniques being presented on film were, in his considered professional opinion, being demonstrated by people who had spent more time in front of cameras than in serious training environments. He paused. He let the sentence settle. Then he said, with the careful precision of a man who has rehearsed a line but wants it to sound unrehearsed, that what American audiences had been shown was, in his specific and technical assessment, not real martial arts. He did not use Chuck Norris's name in that sentence. He did not have to. The room knew. The room knew because Chuck Norris was the most recognizable martial artist in American cinema at that moment. Because he was sitting in the 4th row and because Steven Seagal's eyes moved. Just once, briefly, and then deliberately away, toward the 4th row before he finished the sentence. That single glance was a choice. There were 430 people in the room, and the majority of them registered the implication before Seagal had finished speaking. The woman from the organizing committee, standing at the side of the stage with a clipboard held flat against her chest, later said that the room did not make a sound, not a shifting of chairs, not a cleared throat. 430 people went completely still. Then Chuck Norris set down the coffee he had not touched, stood up and walked toward the stage. He was not hurrying. This is the detail that everyone who was there agrees upon, even 40 years later. He was not hurrying. He moved the way a man moves when he has somewhere specific to go and no particular reason to arrive there quickly. He moved through the 4th row, through the 3rd, through the gap between the 2nd row and the stage riser. He walked up the 3 steps at the left side of the stage without looking down at his feet. He reached the top and stopped, 7 feet from where Seagal was standing. The room recognized him in a wave. It was not instantaneous. It moved from the front to the back, row by row, like a current that has somewhere to go. The slight shift of bodies, the lean of attention, the way the air in a room reorganizes itself when something important has changed. By the time the recognition had reached the back row, the people in the front row had already gone very still. Chuck Norris removed his watch. He set it on the edge of the presenter's table at the side of the stage, face up, the way a man sets something down when he will need to find it again shortly. He unbuttoned his left cuff. He rolled the sleeve once. He unbuttoned the right cuff and did the same. He did these things without looking at Seagal. He did not rush them. And he did not perform them. He simply did them. He had already won. He simply had not yet done it. Before we go further, if you want to know what happened next, every second of it, make sure you are subscribed to this channel and leave a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. The people in that room paid with the irretrievable minutes of their lives to witness what is about to happen. The least you can do is stay to the end. He walked to the center of the stage. He stopped 8 feet from Seagal. He looked at him for a moment, not a long moment, not a theatrical one, and then he said, quietly, so that the first 2 rows could hear him and the rest of the room could not, "I would like to hear more about what real martial arts looks like." There was no sarcasm in it. There was no performance. It was a simple declarative sentence, delivered in the tone a man uses when he is genuinely interested in the answer. Seagal looked at him for 4 seconds. Then he said, "I would be glad to show you. A fight is not 2 men in physical contact. A fight is a conversation that begins long before the first movement. It begins in the moment when one person decides what the other person is, and the other person decides whether that assessment is correct. By the time hands are moving, the essential argument has already been settled in the posture, the breath rate, the placement of the feet, and the quality of attention behind the eyes." The men in that room who understood this, and most of them did, had already read the exchange before it began. They knew what Chuck Norris's stillness meant. They knew what it meant that he had not raised his chin, had not shifted his weight forward, had not arranged his face into anything that communicated urgency. The man opposite him was 6'4" and 220, and had spent 3 years training in Japan. He was a serious practitioner. He had demonstrated that clearly 11 minutes ago. None of that changed the fundamental arithmetic of what was about to happen. Because the arithmetic was not about credentials. It was about distance. Distance is the language that trained men speak before words. Chuck Norris understood distance. At 8 feet, he was outside the engagement range Seagal preferred for entry technique. Seagal preferred close range. He preferred the moment when forward momentum carried an opponent into the grip zone, where wrist control and body weight redirection became available. At 8 feet, none of that was available. At 8 feet, the man who is patient owns the space between. Seagal stepped forward to 6 feet. Norris did not move. Seagal settled at 6 feet, and there was a pause of approximately 3 seconds. The kind of pause that fighters recognize as the moment when the mind finishes its last argument with itself and releases the body to do what the body knows. Then Seagal moved. Second one. He entered with a forward step, right foot first, initiating what was recognizable to every person in that room as a standard Aikido Irimi entry. A direct forward movement designed to close distance and position him beside rather than in front of his opponent, from which he would secure wrist control and execute the throw. It was a legitimate technique. It had worked thousands of times. It worked now exactly as far as the first 6 inches of forward momentum, which is to say, it did not work. Chuck Norris pivoted, not backward, not away. Laterally, to his left, a single step of perhaps 14 inches, unhurried, so that the entry point Seagal was moving to was no longer where Norris was. Seagal's leading hand reached for a wrist that was no longer there. His weight was committed forward. His center of gravity was 3 inches past the point where a man can adjust without effort, and Norris's right hand came across and settled, not struck, settled, against Seagal's right shoulder with the specific, controlled pressure of a man demonstrating something rather than doing it. At the table to the right of the stage, Raymond Ramsey, a 5th-degree judo black belt, who had been running the event's logistics for 3 days and who had seen, by his own later estimate, thousands of sparring exchanges, placed both palms flat on the table surface and did not move them. Second 2. Seagal recovered quickly. The recovery was fast and well trained and showed exactly the kind of physical competence the earlier 11 minutes had suggested. He reset, turned, closed the distance with 2 quick steps. This time the entry was lower, reaching for hip control, a different approach, one that acknowledged the failure of the first without abandoning the principle behind it. He was adjusting, he was thinking. These are not the actions of a man without skill. Norris led him close to 3 feet. Then he was not there. The movement was so small that the people in the 8th row could not determine, afterward, what had happened. The people in the first 2 rows saw it clearly. He had shifted his centerline by perhaps 6 inches to the right, not a step, barely a pivot. And Seagal's hands closed on an angle that had changed. Norris's left hand touched Seagal's forearm. That is all it did. It touched it. But the touch landed at the precise moment in Seagal's weight transfer, when the arm's own momentum became a liability, and Seagal went to the floor. He went down controlled. He rolled well. He had trained falls for years in Japan, and the ukemi was clean, nothing injured, back on his feet in under 2 seconds. That matters. It is easy to mistake a clean fall for a lesser fall, and what happened in this room was not lesser. It was exact. A woman named Carol Feynman, who had spent 19 years as a judo competitor and coach and had arrived at this event specifically because she was developing a training curriculum for film stunt coordination, later said that she had watched the exchange 3 times in her mind before she was certain she had seen what she thought she had seen. She said, "He used almost nothing." That is what I kept going back to. He used almost nothing. Second 3. Seagal stood. He looked at Norris for 1 full second, then he moved again. This time there was no setup, no preliminary. He came in directly, closing fast, both hands reaching for a double lapel grip that would have given him the leverage he needed. Both hands, committed weight. A serious technique from a serious man in a serious moment. Norris moved backward for the first time. 1 step, just 1. His right foot went back and he bent very slightly at the knees, and Seagal's hands found his shirt, and for 1/2 second they were in contact, and then Norris's weight went low and forward simultaneously, which is the direction no one expects from a man stepping backward. And his right leg was no longer behind him. It was between Seagal's feet, and the geometry of 2 men in the same space had arranged itself in a way that only goes one direction. Seagal went down again. This time he went down heavier. Not badly, not without control, but heavier. The floor registered it. The people in the front rows heard the impact even through the carpet over the riser boards. He lay still for exactly 2 seconds. Chuck Norris did not move. He stood where he was. His breathing was normal. His expression had not changed since he had walked up the stairs on the left side of the stage. His shirt was untucked on one side from the final exchange. He did not touch it. He looked at Seagal on the floor. Then he extended his hand. Not dramatically, not with ceremony. He extended his hand the way a man extends his hand to someone who has fallen off a curb, practically with the assumption that the other person will take it, and that both of them will then be standing up, and that will be the end of the ground portion of the evening. He held the hand steady, waiting. He was not impatient. 430 people in that room were not breathing. Seagal looked at the hand for a long moment. Then he took it. Norris brought him to his feet. They were standing 18 inches apart. Norris looked at him, and he said something. He said it quietly enough that the first row, leaning forward in their silver chairs, could not hear it. Only Seagal heard it. What those words were would not be confirmed by either man in any public statement for many years. A production assistant who was standing at the edge of the stage later offered his version of what he believed he saw Norris's lips form. A third-party instructor who had been in conversation with Seagal 3 months later in a different context shared what he believed Seagal had repeated privately. In a quieter moment. These accounts are not identical, but they suggest something in the direction of, "You are very good. Do not confuse good with finished." That sentence, or some version of it, would travel outward from that room. The staged Seagal stood still for one more beat. Then he nodded. It was not a large nod, it was the nod of a man taking in information that requires sitting with. He looked at the floor once, looked back up, and then did something that no one in the room had predicted. He said, in the same deliberate low voice he had used for the last 11 minutes, that he had misjudged. He said it clearly, to the room, not just to Norris. He said that the man in front of him had taught him something tonight and that he intended to think about it. He did not list excuses. He did not explain his technique or rationalize the exchanges. He said what had happened, and he took it standing up. That choice, that specific choice at that specific fork in the road, was the detail that people who were there would return to most often. The technique was already settled. What Seagal did in the next 10 seconds was a different kind of demonstration. Norris picked up his watch. He buttoned his right sleeve, then his left. He walked to the steps and went down them without looking at the room, moved through the gap between the first and second rows, and returned to his chair in the fourth row. He picked up the coffee cup. He sat down. He did not speak to anyone immediately. The man sitting to his right, a retired Special Forces instructor who later said he had been practicing jiu-jitsu for 31 years, put his hand briefly on Norris's shoulder as he sat down, just for a moment, long enough to confirm something, and then removed it. The woman from the organizing committee stood at the microphone for a full 11 seconds before she spoke. The panel discussion that followed ran 42 minutes over its scheduled time, and a significant portion of it had nothing to do with the original agenda. In the weeks after the Beverly Hilton event, the story moved through the channels by which these things have always moved, through training halls and phone calls and the particular efficiency of a community that is small enough that everyone knows someone who was in the room. It traveled from Los Angeles to New York, from New York to London, from London to Tokyo. It gained and lost detail at each stop. In some versions the confrontation was longer. In others there were more exchanges, a larger audience, a formal challenge issued at a microphone. The specific numbers shifted. What did not shift was the central architecture, the entry on a stage, the 3 failed attempts, the extended hand, the floor. That much stayed consistent, because that much had been witnessed by enough people who remembered it the same way. 17 people who were in that room have, at various points across the following 4 decades, been asked to describe what they saw. The descriptions vary in the details that memory adjusts: duration, exact words, precise crowd number. They converge on one thing: the stillness. Everyone who described it came back to the stillness. The way Norris had moved through those 40 seconds with the undisturbed quality of a man doing something routine. The way the absence of urgency communicated something that a display of speed or force would not have communicated. One instructor, speaking to a documentary filmmaker in 2004, said what he showed that night was not that he was dangerous. Everyone in that room was dangerous to some degree. What he showed was that being dangerous was not the most interesting thing about him. That distinction took most people who heard it several minutes to understand. Then it did not require any further explanation. Chuck Norris did not discuss the evening publicly. He never listed it among his professional experiences. He did not give interviews about it. In the years that followed, when journalists who had heard the story from the edges of the Aikido or karate communities asked him about it, he declined to confirm the specifics. He was not falsely modest in his declining. He simply said, in effect, that demonstrations were for students, and that he tried not to teach outside the dojo without a reason. This non-answer was so consistent across so many years that it became, in its own way, a kind of answer. Seagal's first major Hollywood film came out 3 years later. He had spent those 3 years doing what he told the room he would do, thinking about it. The people who worked with him on that film noted, in various later accounts, that his technical preparation for the role had an unusually rigorous quality, that he had the air of someone who had recently revised something important and was incorporating the revision at speed. Whether this is traceable directly to the evening at the Beverly Hilton or to the general pressure of professional transition is impossible to say with certainty. What is known is that he built a career, and that the career required exactly the kind of seriousness he had demonstrated in those 11 minutes of Aikido, before the conversation with Norris began. Both men became, across the following decade, recognizable figures in a very particular corner of American culture. They did not become close, they did not become enemies. They occupied parallel spaces in the martial arts cinema world with a careful equilibrium of two people who have shared a significant moment and agreed, without discussion, not to make it into a story they tell at the expense of each other. This restraint, in the community that followed both careers, was itself regarded as a kind of class. The Beverly Hilton Ballroom was demolished and rebuilt as part of a renovation in 1994. The carpet is different. The lights are different. The folding chairs with the silver legs are gone. Nothing in the room marks what happened there on a Tuesday evening in March of 1983, which is the way these things usually go. The rooms do not remember, the people who were sitting in them do. There is a version of that evening where Seagal chose differently at the fork, where the nod did not come, where the words did not come, where the room saw something smaller than what it saw. That version of the evening does not get told to documentary filmmakers in 2004. It does not travel from Los Angeles to Tokyo. It does not remain consistent across 40 years and 17 witnesses. The accuracy of a man's technical skill can be demonstrated in seconds. The content of his character requires longer. What a man does in the moment after he has lost is the demonstration that does not end when the lights come down. Next week we will talk about the evening a Hollywood fight coordinator told Chuck Norris that the stunt sequence on a working film set would be performed by someone with more camera experience, and what happened in the parking lot afterward that changed the way martial arts are choreographed in American cinema to this day. If you want to be there for that one, you know what to do.